talking about our language worlds, I've just come under the impression how the openness of our living world is determined to such an extent by the width of our language world. I read something recently about some research that was done with the Ovahimba people in Namibia. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with them. To a large extent, they're nomadic stock farmers, and they live in Kahuku land in the far north of Namibia. And to a large extent, they still live a very they live an ancient life where not much has changed on the surface. But an interesting thing is that they have no word for blue in the language. They have a host of words for green, however. They can tell you about different shades of green. I suppose also because green is such a sought after color in their area, because it signifies food and feeding for their livestock. Anyway, so they did this research and they made a circle of colored blocks, most of them shades of green, except for one block, which was blue. These were then presented to people, to the Ovahimba people, and they were asked to point out any block which was significantly different from the rest. And they could not. They could not. They did not have a word to describe blue. Therefore, largely, blue went unnoticed for them. And we can just imagine what the impact socially might be if we don't have words. What goes unnoticed in our lives? So therefore, once again, a confirmation or a reminder that the richness of our living world is to such an extent determined by the richness of our language world. We are also reminded of the Spartans. You might be familiar with how Spartan living has become a metaphor in our language. And it indicates a very basic, very sparse way of living, getting by with just the mere necessities. Now, the Spartans were a warmongering nation state. And they put their people to harsh tests to determine whether they were worthy of inclusion in the community. For instance, little boys were left outside, the baby boys were left outside on their first night, and those who survived were considered to be worthy of becoming members of the Spartan state. But being a war-waging state, their language was directed at instructions. They didn't elaborate. If you had to give an instruction to your company of soldiers, you couldn't embark upon poetic language, elaborate prose to describe what needed to be done. It was to the point, very economic in its context, And as a result, they did not have any language for emotion. They did not have any language indicating emotions. It was simply considered not to be necessary. Now you can just imagine the impoverishing effect on being that might have had. But